Hello and welcome to Larry Has Opinions. Today I'm talking about some of the books that I've been reading recently. So let's get started. The first book that I'm going to mention is The Whale Tattoo by John Ransom, which is a recent release just a few months ago. And this follows this English teenager in a very Dickensian setting somewhat. He lives by the marshes. It's all very grim, grey, depressing. And he's homosexual, so we get to see some of his first encounters, I suppose, with some other men, boys in his surroundings, and some of the challenges related to that. I have to say that I absolutely hated this book with a passion. I found it just full of cliches and a lot of just grim events for the sake of just trying to be edgy and depressing, as opposed to just try to get a genuine reaction from your readers. I think when you go for that sort of grim and dark stories, you have to give your readers something to latch onto, to get an opportunity to get attached to the characters before you throw all of these sort of depressing events and episodes at them. I was like, okay, this person's died now. All right, okay, whatever. I just couldn't really care about any of the story, any of the characters. The characterization was also pretty thin, in my opinion. So again, there wasn't enough to get attached to sort of enjoy all the depressing episodes and this really grim story, in my opinion. I'm sure other readers will see it differently, but personally, I really disliked it completely. The only redeeming quality I would say is that the quality of the writing of the prose is noticeable. It's definitely well written from that perspective, but for me that's not enough to enjoy a book. I can't remember the last time I rated something so low, but this was a 3 out of 10 for me. Moving on to They by K. Dick. This was recently republished because it was initially released about 40 years ago, and then it went out of print because it wasn't particularly successful at the time. And now there's a pretty strong marketing drive, at least here in the UK, to promote this book and describe it as this lost masterpiece, kind of new 1984 sort of vibes. And that's because it's all set in England, in this dystopian England, where you have this authoritarian government that is trying to suppress any form of free thinking and artistic expression. And this is all supported by this group of people who are referred to as they. And so we see books being destroyed, artists being prosecuted, that sort of thing. So this is also, it could be defined as a collection of short stories in some way, because every chapter has slightly different characters and they're all set in the same environment, but they're only loosely connected. So I have to say that I didn't enjoy this very much. I didn't think it was this lost masterpiece. I think it got lost over the years because it's not a masterpiece. I just found it a little bit underwhelming. It's not particularly imaginative. It's nothing that we haven't seen before, done better by other authors, other dystopian classics. I also found it a little bit patronizing and indulgent with this, oh, we're poor us artists drinking champagne in our, on our loan, and these people, everyone is against us. All these plebs watching television, they don't understand anything. The world will be lost without our contribution. This sort of, attitude that comes across a little bit. But it's not just that, it's just that overall the story didn't quite work for me. Only a couple of the short stories were interesting or particularly, gripping. And gripping is a strong word in this respect. But most of them were just a bit meh for me. So I have to say I didn't particularly enjoy this. I'm sure this might resonate with other readers. One of the guys that I read this with as part of a book club described it as a sort of impressionistic fever dream. That I think was an accurate description. So some people might enjoy this, but personally, I didn't like it very much. I rated this 5 out of 10. Then I read Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. And I have to say I had pretty high expectations for this book because the author won the Nobel Prize for Literature only a few years ago. And in the novel, we follow this older woman who lives in a very small village in rural Poland, a place that is pretty much cut off from the rest of the world, especially in winter. And the main character is also pretty peculiar and quirky because she's massively into animal rights, and also she loves astrology. So a bit of an unusual character to follow. I really enjoyed the setting. Again, for me, a pretty unique setting to read about. I don't usually read a lot of books set in Poland. And also the main character being a bit different from your stereotypical protagonists. And I also appreciate the way the author explored the theme of how society treats older people, older women specifically. That said, I have to say that I'm not sure it lived up to my really high expectations that I had for this book. Even though I enjoyed it and I would recommend it to a lot of people, I still found it slightly underwhelming because I just found there was a little bit missing and a fair amount of repetition. It just didn't leave as strong a mark or impression on me that I was possibly expecting this might do. So I ended up rating this 7 out of 10. Then I have The Obelisk by N.K. Jemisin, which is the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy. I'm not going to cover the plot because I don't want to spoil the first book, but if you're interested in a synopsis of the trilogy overall, I have a full review for the first book on the channel. You might or might not remember that I enjoyed the first book. I found it pretty solid, but I also thought it wasn't quite living up to the hype that surrounds this trilogy and all the prizes that it's won. And I have to say that I have similar thoughts for the second book as well. I still find the world building the best aspect of the trilogy, I have to say. Is this world where people are not really looking up at the stars, but they're looking down because some humans are able to harness this geothermal energy, which is the energy that drives volcanoes and earthquakes, and use it. And it's a setting that might well be our own planet Earth in a far future, and that's why this is often defined as sci fantasy. The characters are also always very believable and well developed, similarly to the first book. However, I have to say that overall, I still find it slightly forgettable. For some reason, I don't get that sort of page-turning obsession that I get with some other series where you really want to know what comes next. You really get attached to the characters. It's all very well developed, very solid, very entertaining, but not quite as strong as I was hoping. Or at least it's not resonating as much for me, even though I'm sure a lot of people will still love this book, and it's not significantly worse or anything than the first installment. So I would imagine if you like the first book, you're probably gonna still enjoy the second book, in my opinion. I ended up rating this 7 out of 10. And lastly, I have my favorite book for this video, and that's Small Things Like These by Keegan. This is a very short novella, so I don't want to say too much about the plot, but it's set in 1985 in a small town in Ireland. And we follow this man who has this small business in town selling timber, and we get to see some of his family life and professional life. But crucially, he's facing these ethical dilemma about some really unpleasant episodes that he witnesses. And I have to say that I really love how the author was able to describe these mechanisms that can really take hold, especially in smaller communities where people get this sort of almost double think, where some part of them know that something bad might be happening, but another part of them don't want to see them and therefore don't see them, and they're kind of genuine in that belief that they don't see these things happening. It's a very wintry book, but you can read it anytime. And quite crucially, it's inspired by true events that happened in Ireland in a relatively recent past. I have to say that I always appreciate when an author can manage to accomplish a really punchy, really memorable story with such a low page count. And I think Keegan really hits the mark here. So for that reason, I ended up rating this 9 out of 10. Now, before I wrap up, I really want to say a big thank you to all the people who left me a comment or dropped me messages just to ask whether I was still gonna post videos, if I was okay, what was happening, especially all the guys on my Discord who've been incredibly supportive. I'm incredibly grateful, so I really appreciate your support. I have to say that I will not be posting as frequently as I was for a number of personal reasons I don't want to get into, but I still hope that I will be keeping the channel alive, so I hope you stick around. Thank you very much.